Alabama's the best team in the country by far, but Georgia's a team that can match up with Alabama because of Kirby, because of athletes, and they have an offense that can produce. The key to the game, in my opinion, Alabama throws daggers nonstop with Judy, with Waddle, with Smith. These receivers, they hit big-time plays down the field. They're number one in the country in doing that. What Georgia has to do is eliminate the big play. Guess what? They're second in the country at eliminating the big play. Something's got to give in this game. That's Georgia's hope. Keep it in front of you. Make Alabama go 10, 12 plays. Stop them in the red zone to a field. Hold them to a field goal, maybe one turnover. That is the key for Georgia to hang around in this game, to be around, to make a fourth quarter comeback.
Obviously, everybody's been raving about Tua all year long. We expect him to win the Heisman, quite honestly, Tim. But I ask you this question. When we look at the greatness of Alabama this year, how much credit would you give to Tua specifically, meaning that if Jalen Hurts was their quarterback instead of Tua, what would we be saying about Alabama?
Well, I think Tua has been the best player in the country this year. I think Kyler Murray is right behind him. But I think if Jalen was a quarterback, I still think Alabama would be undefeated. They're just that good. They're that dominant. You look at the running backs. They got 4 guys that will be legit running backs in the NFL. They got 3 receivers that will be pretty high draft picks. They got a tight end that's a mismatch for anyone. Their offensive line has 2 All-Americans. Their defense has been getting better all year. Maybe they're one of the best defenses in the country now. It's a ridiculous team from top to bottom. Listen, they have backups that are better than some teams' starters, even in the top 10. It's a ridiculous amount of riches that they have. And I think, by the way, Jalen Hurts would also be a top 20 quarterback that led his team to 2 national titles.
Yeah, it's a whole lot. It's extra. Tim, let's assume Alabama, therefore, remains undefeated, and so does Clemson. Which one-loss team is more deserving of a playoff spot, Ohio State or Oklahoma?
Well, see, this is where we get into a sticky situation. More deserving, or most deserving, is not what we're supposed to be looking at. We're supposed to be looking at, and from what I know the rules are, the 4 best teams. So we look at these teams and we evaluate and we say, okay, not most deserving, not most credible, but the 4 best. And in my opinion, I have Ohio State and Oklahoma above Notre Dame. As far as the 4 best. Not most deserving, not most consistent, but right now, as we speak, on a neutral field, who would I predict to win? I predict Ohio State and Oklahoma over Notre Dame. Now, I know Notre Dame fans are going to be mad.
Let's say it comes down to it, though, Tim. Let's say it comes down to a choice between Oklahoma and Ohio State. Who are you going with in that choice?
Right now, before we watch the games tomorrow night, I'm going with Ohio State because of what they did last week in embarrassing Michigan. It's the best win of the season, maybe by any team, and they're the hottest right now. And Oklahoma, although their loss was a very good loss, they don't have a win like that. And so I'm going to take, at the end of the season, when Oklahoma won by 3, I'm going to take Ohio State running away against the number 4 team in the country.
Tim, work with me on this. Max and I have been going back and forth because he's an Oklahoma guy in that scenario. I'm Ohio State as well. Max doesn't believe that somebody like myself should count Oklahoma's defense against them. I'm looking at Oklahoma. It's given up over 40 points at least 5 or 6 games this year. I'm looking at an Oklahoma team, whether it's against Kansas or West Virginia, you gave up 56. Oklahoma State, you gave up 40. Their last 4 games, they've given up 40 plus. It's one thing to be suspect defensively. It's one thing to not show up on a particular day or afternoon defensively. It's another thing to give the impression damn near through an entire season that you don't particularly care about defense. I think that's the kind of thing that should count against you when we're looking at the playoff picture. To that you say what?
Well, I think it has to come into play. You have to look at offense, defense, and special teams. You have to give credit to their offense. Their offense is dynamic, arguably the best in the country. Their quarterback is terrific. I have him right behind Tua right now in the Heisman voting. He is a dynamic playmaker. But you got to look and say, if this team turns the football over 1 or 2 times, which could easily happen, it's football, accidents happen. If that happens, they got a chance of losing. Guess what? If that happens to Alabama, they still win by 40. If that happens to Clemson, they win by 20. So there's a big gap because the defense is just so hard for them to show up and be consistent. consistently get stops. Listen, they hope to get 2 stops, 3 stops, not consistent stops. I think
just
that
like
has
to
to come
see.
into play.
I just think, listen, no one has a shot against Alabama, right? But I'd like to see a puncher's chance, and I think Oklahoma, given that offense, at least has a puncher's chance. Let's mix it up. Let's see Lincoln Riley in the air raid, the whole thing in the mix. And it's not so much that they don't play defense. It's like they shouldn't be penalized for having a great offense. I think there's a tendency to look at high-scoring games, count them against it. But, Tim, they don't have a loss like Ohio State got spanked at Purdue. They lost by a field goal in the Red River rivalry by a field goal on the road. Okay, you can live with that.
Because they turned the football over twice. That's why they lost. But also to give Oklahoma credit, not that we look at last year, but what Lincoln Riley and Oklahoma did to the Georgia defense, although they lost in the Rose Bowl, that was still an outstanding performance. And Lincoln Riley, I think, is the best offensive coordinator in the country. And so you got to give them a lot of credit. And you know he'll game plan for whatever team he faces. If it's Alabama, he'll have an amazing game plan. But you also know Urban Meyer will too. And Urban Meyer's been the underdog where he's defeated Saban. So you got to give love there too. Plus a defense that's getting better and special teams that always comes up big with blocked punts.
Well,
you saw it against Michigan. So you got to give credit there as well.
Tim, we always talk about Notre Dame. We talk about Georgia. We talk about Oklahoma and Ohio State now. Well, just like Alabama is number 1, there's a team that's consistently been number 2 that happens to be Clemson. Why have we not said enough about them, and what kind of a legitimate threat do you perceive them as being, considering the fact that they're at number 2? Because it's almost like they're the forgotten team in all of this.
Well, I think we've said a lot about them. I think that Clemson is a really good team. They're a complete team. I think that they got a tiny bit exposed last week against South Carolina. Gave up 35 points, which was very close to being 49 points because they had 2 4th-and-1 stops on the goal line. I do think they're a complete team. They're the second best team in the country right now. But compared to Alabama, there's still a gap.